Hello. Today our learning goal is to compare two mediums, that's different kinds of information, of the same sequence for similarities and differences. Here we're going to be trying to transfer text into timelines. So today you need to do the I do, which is what you're already in right now. You're going to learn to compare the information found in timelines versus sequence articles. Then you'll have a we do, where you'll work with me to compare and contrast the information in a timeline and the sequence article by turning one into the other. And then finally, you will build your own timeline out of information given to you. And then, as always, you will have an exit ticket to complete. Remember, sequence text tell us in what order to do something or in what order something happened. Depending on the kind of sequence text we're reading, we will learn different kinds of information. A how-to is very different than a historical timeline. Alright, so different questions require different sources. If we have a right there question, something really simple and easy to answer, like when was the Voting Rights Act passed, we're probably going to look for a timeline versus an in-depth question like what actions did people take to pass the Voting Rights Act. So if I look at a timeline and I find the Voting Rights Act right here, see how this is really simple? It's just a little bit of information on each date. It tells me the Voting Rights Act passes 1965. Okay, so if I come back here, my quick, easy answer is 1965. Oops, wrong side. 1965. But if I want to find the actions, this doesn't really tell me what people did, right, to get it passed. I might have to look at a sequence article, so something like this that has a lot more information. I can go down to 1965, the Voting Rights Act passes Congress. Inspired by voting rights marches in Alabama in spring 1965, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act. The vote was decisive and bipartisan. President Lyndon Johnson signed the measure on August 6th. With Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and other icons, in addition to barring many of the policies barriers, and so forth and so on. So my answer might be a little more in depth, and it might say something like marches were conducted until the Senate or until Congress finally passed it in 1965, and then the president signed it, right? See how that's a much more complex answer, and we had to go to something with more complex information. And so that's sort of the difference between a timeline, which is one kind of sequence text, and a regular sequence text that has paragraphs and information and is just put in sort of chronological order. So if we look here, we can do another one, right? Right there, who could vote in 1776? If I go to this one right here, white men who met the property or religious requirements could vote in 1776, right? So I'm going to say white men who own property and were the right religion. Right? Now, what different tests were used to qualify someone to vote in 1776 is a much more complex question, right? So I'm going to go back to my article here. Go to the top where it says the 1700s. Despite their beliefs and virtues of democracy, the founders of the United States accepted and endorsed severe limits on voting. The U.S. Constitution originally left it to states to determine who is qualified to vote in elections. For decades, state legislators generally restricted voting to white males who own property. Some states also employed religious tests to ensure that only Christian men could vote. So, my answer might be, first, the only people who could vote were white men. They also had to own property, and in some states, forget the Y on property, and in some states they had to be Christian to vote. So you can see how these more complex questions require us to find a sequence text or read a sequence text that have more complex information, again, versus the more simple information that we have inside something like a simple timeline. Alright, so that is the I Do portion of this lesson. Please return to the Google Classroom and you're going to open the We Do Ed puzzle next. Thank you.